The wheel kick is a super athletic and fun kick to watch. So in today's video, we're going to explore some of the underlying biomechanics behind the wheel kick. And then we'll take a look at how some of those biomechanics can differ from athlete to athlete. All right, you know we can't do a wheel kick breakdown without doing the Barboza Etim knockout. I mean, this is essentially one of the best knockouts in UFC history. So we have to look at this one. So we're going to take a look at the kicking leg. We'll take a look at the leg he's rotating about. We'll look at the trunk, and as we look at the trunk, we're going to look at the trunk in relation to Wonderboy's second wheel kick in that fight against Ellenberger that ends up knocking him out. So we'll look at some of the comparisons there. It's really cool to see different athletes doing the same kick at relatively the same angle because it gives us a good idea of how biomechanics can differ in certain fighting situations. Okay, so as he kind of shifts his weight over to the left leg, again, we're going to start here at the knee with the kicking leg, right? So as he chambers, he flexes with muscles like the hamstrings, and then the gastroc, also a muscle of the calf, also flexes the knee. And then as he brings the leg around, he extends the knee so that he gets this whipping motion at the knee, and he can actually flex it again once he makes contact. Okay, so those are some of the biomechanics happening at the knee. While that's happening, let's shift our attention up to the hip here. So this is the right hip or the hip of the kicking leg. Shifts weight over to the left. As the knee flexes, the hip also flexes with muscles like the psoas major and the rectus femoris and the TFL, just to name a few. There are several that actually assist in hip flexion. But as he's flexing, he's also, as he kind of side bends his body, which we'll talk about in a second, he's abducting the hip or bringing it away from the body. Muscles involved in that would be like the TFL and the glute med. And then he starts to, while the hip is abducted in an abducted position, he also extends the hip. So the leg is already out to the side. It's already abducted. And in order to kind of bring it towards the back of his body while the knee is flexing, he also extends it with muscles like the glute max and the hamstring. So the hamstring is really involved here. So the hamstring is helping extend the hip and flex the knee at the same time. Okay? So hamstrings need to be really resilient and flexible for this type of movement, and combined with just athleticism of the athlete. So that kind of covers the leg that's kicking. All right, let's move to the leg that he's rotating about. Again, he's shifting his weight over, and just notice that the ankle is flexed, the knee is flexed, and the hip is flexed. All three in this flexed position, and that matters because as he starts to send his center of mass upward and towards, or upwards, actually not really much toward Etim, we see this combination of ankle extension or plantar flexion for muscles like the gastroc and the soleus, extension of the knee with muscles like the quads, and then extension of the hip again, except this time in the closed chain. So that means with the foot planted on the ground. And this is something that we've seen over and over again in really good strikers, particularly strikers who shift their weight really well and distribute energy from the ground through their extremities while they're striking. With something like a round kick or any spinning kick, you have to make sure that you are pivoting on that leg. And the reason is because if that leg were to stay planted, you'd get a lot of torque here at the knee and the hip. So if you actually pay attention here to the knee and the hip, you'll see that the angle of the knee and the hip really don't change very much because he's doing a good job of kind of swiveling and pivoting on his toes in that plantar flex position. And then once he stops rotating, that leg just kind of finishes the movement. It's beautiful stuff. Really good lower extremity evaluation here that gives us a really good view of what is actually happening at kind of the beginning of the trunk and then the lower limb. And then we're going to look and travel up as promised to the trunk. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about something called the hip and shoulder separation. All right, so, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a demonstration of this in a second, but if you notice, I'm actually just going to pause the video right here. And then we're going to look at the similar position whenever Wonderboy is doing his wheel kick. So these are similar positions, and I want to take just a look at what is different here about them. Barboza is much more built, right? He's got a lot more muscle mass, and he's not as mobile. He's not as kind of like Gumby-like. He's not as flexible. And so if we look at the angle of the hip or the femur here, this is the muscle of the thigh, or the bone of the thigh, we can see that they're in relatively the same position. But look at the angle of the shoulders relative to the hips. I mean, Wonderboy's hips are essentially facing us still. You can still see like the front of his shorts here. But his shoulders, I mean, is as if he's facing some of the people out here in the audience, and maybe even like that Bud Light sign. It's at least a 45 to 60 degree angle off of the plane of his hips. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. Barboza doesn't have as much rotation there. So he's probably, again, draw a line between the hips and then look at the angle of his shoulders. So Thompson would have probably been looking at this Metro PCS sign, but the angle of Barboza's shoulders actually look like he's going and looking a little bit more to the left than Wonderboy was. And then the next thing we're going to look at is what actually happens whenever so how far the leg is moved whenever they stop rotating their hips. So you could tell right here, his hips kind of stop rotating right about there, and then his leg does most of the rest of the movement. So we're going to stop it right there. And then we're going to look at the same type of movement. So Wonderboy's hips stop rotating right about here. His leg is still, it's not even visible because it's hidden by his body here. And that's just how much of a kind of a lag and a whipping effect it's having as opposed to Barboza. So he's taking a little bit less advantage of the stretch reflex here in the glute muscle. So this glute extends the hip, so the more flexed it is, the more it's put on stretch. And you can see here that his leg is lagging way behind. And so he's a little bit leaning forward. We'll talk here in a second why he's doing that. But you can just tell that the different ways that athletes move whenever their mobility is different, and they can kind of tell how their body's going to react in certain situations through being in that environment for so long. And the way that I want to show you guys this is I've actually taken the Human Anatomy Atlas app here, and I've drawn this line for you so you can visualize a little bit better when we go by to look at it, that there's a line that's crossing this pelvic, it's called the iliac crest. Okay, so I've tried to draw it because when the pelvis moves, it typically, the iliac crest on both sides kind of move as in a unison, okay? But I've also drawn the line of what would be the movement of the shoulders. So let's wait for the skeleton to move back, and we can see that the line that I've drawn is where the skeleton is going to end up. And this is what I'm talking about when I talk about that hip-shoulder separation. So this is the line of the hips, and then we're going to look and see whenever this rotates, it's going to rotate into that plane that I drew for it. And we'll stop it right there. So this is essentially the transverse plane, so it's a rotational movement around the transverse plane, and then the shoulders would be along this plane of movement, and the hips would be along this plane of movement. And you can see how kind of stretched and flexed different muscles in the trunk are. And that's what we're talking about whenever we talk about that hip and shoulder separation here. So let's go back. Look at how much separation Wonderboy has. I mean, his hips, if you were to draw that same line there, it would be probably 20 to 30 degrees more pronounced than this one here. Okay? And then Barboza's would be a little bit less, but it's still pretty pronounced. I mean, so with kicks, we typically see the shoulders move before the hips, and it just, both of them have demonstrated that really good hip-shoulder separation and taking advantage of the stretch reflex and muscles in the trunk. But I like to look at the nuances like that and see kind of why, for instance, Wonderboy Thompson landed with his foot, his kicking leg, once he made contact, landed down with his right leg in front of him because he had to move his center of mass more forward. So watch him. So if you watch Barboza starts to rotate and keeps his center of mass aligned on top of that leg that he's rotating about. And that allows him, when he follows through with the kick, to kind of bring his leg back around and finish kind of like in this stereotypical way you would do it when you were practicing or kicking the bag. But being that Wonderboy Thompson was a little further away and was moving away from him, he had to actually kind of reach, and that actually increased the stretch reflex even more in his glute. So coupled with the fact that he's already really flexible and mobile, he was able to reach and then had to land forward because his center of mass was not over the axis of rotation, which is essentially his ankle. I see a ton of people in the comments harping on just having absolutely perfect biomechanical technique. Biomechanics is only the lens through which we look and analyze human movement. It's not a very good way to analyze human behavior or the intent of the fighter or anything like that. So just a really good display, and hopefully you guys took something away from it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.